on to Ashen America's, whatever the name of that show is, Making Sandwich for Alpha or whatever. Wonderful ladies, had a great time being on there today. Obviously, I try to make as many of those types of invites as I can. Hey, everybody. Just want to welcome everybody. Thanks for your patience. As I thought I was saying, but the mic was off. I got a last minute invite on to Ashen America's show over on Badlands at 3 o'clock. And I want to make as many of those as I can because there's always new audiences to share this information with. And so spent a couple of hours doing that. It went a lot longer than I thought it would, but it was all good. Wonderful, brilliant conversation. And definitely encourage you guys to go watch that. They had some very interesting topics, stuff I don't normally hear about, talk about, whatever. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff coming up. I'll talk about some of it at the end of the show. And just things are happening so fast in a good way that it's just frankly hard to keep up. Hi, Donnie Vision. I see you over there on Rumble, and I saw you down below. Anyway, we're going to get started. Hopefully this week we can get this book finished up. So this the last couple of chapters, this particular chapter 17 is the New Wave Covert Actions. And it starts with talking about Jimmy Carter recalling that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was a shock to the world. Certainly wasn't a shock to the CIA because they set it up. But at the time, President Carter said that he told a reporter on New Year's Eve that the Soviet action affected his thinking more profoundly than anything that had happened during his entire time in the White House. One of his responses was a covert action to help the Afghans against the Russians, as Carter put it to undergraduate students at Emory University in 1982. A covert program was the best way to punish the Soviets short of going to war, which wasn't feasible. Which then, of course, begs the question, did the CIA not tell them what they were doing? Because they basically baited the Soviets into a response in Afghanistan. Where Carter made one big paramilitary play, his successor, Ronald Reagan, had used covert techniques profusely. President Reagan continued the secret war in Afghanistan and selected new battlefields such as Nicaragua, Chad, Libya. We know he was in Angola as well. In the process of conducting all of these campaigns, the CIA regenerated its covert action capability that had been decimated by President Carter. The administration has conceded nothing to congressional oversight unless it had to. It was this an attempt to use the existence of a threat to use covert operations. The Reagan years has left plausible deniability in tatters. The hand of the White House and the NSC became very visible to everyone. Reagan's secret wars had revealed new problems of accountability and control. Invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets represented not so much a blitzkrieg, as was breathlessly written in the news accounts of those days, but a creepy intervention down the path into an unmarked quagmire. This was no surprise in Washington, where the Soviets' progress there had been slowly monitored for several years. American intelligence had good estimates on the number of military advisors, their gradual increase, and their activities. Weeks before December 1979 invasion, the U.S. detected the buildup of combat forces and the introduction of Russian paratroops into the Afghan capital. As early as summer before the invasion, NSC Brzezinski warned President Carter to expect the Russians to support a coup that would overthrow the government of Kabul, because that's what they were planning. Um, I I just want to share with you something when I was initially going over this particular chapter. Keep in mind, in December, we know in October um, of 80 what is going to go on with the October surprise and basically interfering in the US election and making sure Reagan won. This is December 1979, which is on the cusp of the election cycle in 1990 or 80, sorry. So as we go into the election cycle of 1980, the Soviet Union is baited into entering Afghanistan. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I find it very interesting that because Jimmy Carter was indeed so shocked, and there's actually several um, uh, newspaper articles that was written after Carter was out of office, which begs the question, was this another part of election interference in the setting up of the Soviet invasion into Afghanistan? And then again, the whole strategy of tension, creating chaos in order to demand certain responses from the current administration. The first Soviet airborne units deployed to Bagram Air Base outside of Kabul in the second week of December. More paratroopers landed in December around the 20th, but the coup and invasion started on Christmas. President Amin was reportedly killed in a shootout with Soviet agents and other Afghans in his office, because it looks exactly like the Allende scenario. Just saying. Amin had enjoyed complete power for only a few months since the ouster of his predecessor, Taraki. Now Amin had, in turn, lost out to another faction headed by Karmal, Karmal, who assumed the office of president. Karmal immediately asked for major Soviet assistance, an appeal that became the official justification, supposedly, for the Soviet intervention. North of Kabul, the vanguard of 85,000 Soviet army began crossing the border. Tactically disposed, it may be noted, for a road march, not for combat. Simultaneously, the airlift to Bagram assumed massive proportions. The international political terms, the Soviet quote-unquote invasion of Afghanistan made not the slightest difference. No country switched camps. The Russians gained nothing. Afghanistan had already been a Soviet ally for the better part of a decade. The alliance forged by a paramilitary government long before the coup. The Soviets appear to have made a move in order to avoid losing an ally. Not exactly. This seizure of power had the principal effect of sharpening the differences in factions within the Afghan community. Both the government put in power and the one overthrown in December 79 were of the same ilk. The invasion of Afghanistan, writes Jimmy Carter, was direct aggression by the Soviets against a freedom-loving people. That's not exactly what they were. Although the facts are not as simple as Carter suggests, the president's fury was sufficient for him to initiate a number of actions, which is exactly what they wanted. This prompted American grain sales to Russia to stop, a boycott of the 1980 Olympics that was scheduled to be held in the Soviet Union, a withdrawal of the SALT II arms control treaty from the Senate, ratification procedures, which is really what I think they were after. And in his State of the Union address in 1980, President focused on what became known as the Carter Doctrine to protect nations in the Middle East, South Asia, and the Horn of Africa. Covert action was one component of the response. Of course, the Afghan rebels began fighting the Afghan government in 1978 and had dominated much of the mountainous regions. Russians' intervention unleashed a towering wave of international condemnation in the climate in the U.S. It approached Egypt and China about a joint operation to aid the rebels. Anwar Sadat of Egypt confirmed in 1981 that the covert action was suggested immediately after the Soviet invasion. Egypt furnished concrete assistance to the Afghan resistance. This ranged from weapons to Egyptian training. Sadat considered the Afghans a brother in Islamic fighting against the Soviet quote unquote imperialism. Now, keep in mind, Sadat is a product of the West as well. So he's going to be a mouthpiece for them. Apparently, the Chinese did not immediately go along on the Afghan project. Secretary of Defense Harold Brown visited Peking a few weeks after the invasion, but his talk centered on military matters and excuse me, and produced no Afghan action plan. In a series of exchanges over the summer, the Chinese modified their stance a bit, and it says Chinese are believed to have sold Soviet-type weapons to the U.S. to be able to then use in Afghanistan. I don't know why they would want Soviet weapons, but whatever. Brzezinski according to Brzezinski, there never was a eye-to-eye confrontation between the Soviets and the U.S. because we basically used the Pakistani ISI to filter all of the money and allowed them to make most of the decisions where our money was going inside of Afghanistan to the Pakistan ISI, which is their intelligence services, which basically empowered them to grow exponentially because they were basically taking, depending on who you read, as much as 75% of the money was being siphoned off into Pakistan for other reasons, which is really interesting because when was BCCI set up? The Pakistani bank that really wasn't actually headquartered in Pakistan, 1972. So all of this money, all of these weapons, and money to buy weapons, which BCCI was laundering all over the world. Wouldn't it be really convenient to have a war in the country next door? Very, very convenient. So there was firepower, was basically what the Soviet was using to bomb rebel stronghold. Villages thought to house rebel bands were bombed. And basically the author goes on and tries to make it, not that it wasn't bad, it was bad. But telling us how bad Russia is, and Russia did a drop in the bucket compared to what we did like in Laos. The Russians were right to be alarmed about the refugees in Pakistan. Those villages were the very foundation of the Afghan Holy War. Recruits from those villages. Basically, the U.S. used those refugees to train them to be terrorists to use in the future. The resistance revolved around 6 major political groupings or tribes, and said that they were in basically a loose confederation to fight back against the Soviets. Afghan resistance was effectively stalemated by the Russians. Soon after the invasion, the Soviets were forced to replace the original invading units of ethnic groups with affinities to the Pashtuns of Afghanistan because Moscow doubted the political reliability of these soldiers. The strength gradually grew to 105 and then soon 115,000. Eventually, there were some estimates as high as 140,000 troops. By 1985, the cumulative Soviet losses were assessed to be between 40,000 to 60,000 people. Opening the weapons pipeline had given to give the Afghans weaponry. President Carter opened the flow in January 1980, and by mid-month, rumors of the CIA operations was everywhere in Washington. A month later, the Egyptian Ministry of Defense announced its training of Afghans. The Washington Post disclosed that the CIA was informed about the arms shipments. White House officials confirmed that NSC special coordination committees were meeting about the operations in Afghanistan. Early arms aid appears to have been fairly cautious. Soviet weapons only, many of them obsolete, were smuggled into Pakistan. And remember, that's what I was telling you, how they were basically skimming the money. They were going to places in like Bulgaria and buying like really old, rusted, nasty weapons for pennies on the dollar and giving them to the tribal people. And some of them didn't even work. And they were pocketing the rest of the money. After the election, there was a transition team that unanimously felt more should be done in the way of covert action. And William Casey, Reagan's 1980 campaign manager, who becomes the new Central Intelligence Director, was a friend of Reagan's and a member of his quote unquote kitchen cabinet. That's basically like his special group in the National Security Advisor area. Unlike other CIA directors, Casey made no bones about offering policy advice to the president. In the 1980 campaign, Reagan had already adopted the rhetoric of aiding the Afghan rebels. Statements he made advocated for more sophisticated, i.e., U.S. weapons. Even after Carter moved some distance in the direction of giving better weapons, the week before Reagan's inauguration, there were reports that because of rebel weapons, the Soviets had to relocate all of their aircraft and helicopters parked along the runway at Bagram. In early 1981, the Russians also reported that the partisans were using careless mines immune to metal detectors that had came from the West. In office, Reagan went further. He approved and substantially increased money and weapons. Like some declassified documents indicate as much as $625 million. In 1982, the U.S. had spent $217 million on refugee assistance in Pakistan alone. Within the framework of a Cold War spoiling operation, most of the money should be translated into weapons useful to the Afghans. Sometimes this was not as simple as it sounds. The most glaring example in Afghanistan was anti-aircraft capability. The Soviet war effort is heavily dependent on air power, ranging from 400 fixed-wing aircraft flying from bases inside of the Soviet Union to 600 to 900 planes and helicopters based in Afghan fields, including the nation's own Air Force. From the beginning of the jihad or holy war, it was clear that the ability to do something about the Soviet aircraft was desperately needed. Improving the rebel anti-aircraft capability took years, because they weren't interested in an easy answer. The long time, because remember the Brzezinski said that they were going to make this the Soviet Union's Vietnam. They weren't interested in it being over soon. They didn't care about how many dead bodies resulted in it. So it goes on and talks about the different weapons, and it says a lack of suitable merchandise on the international arms market and talks with China hampered procurement of the missiles. In the fall of 1983, an amendment to the defense budget proposed by Charlie Wilson, a Democrat of Texas, that would have rerouted Pentagon money to purchase new foreign-made heavy anti-aircraft cannons. The guns would go to the CIA for the Afghan guerrillas. Wilson's proposal touched off a fury of concern. The Pentagon's top man on intelligence, General Richard Stilwell, who had worked on and off for the CIA over a long period of time, argued that the cannon was the wrong weapon because it required more expensive ammunition. When the White House Intelligence Committee approved the funds, but asked the CIA for a report on the anti-aircraft cannon, it developed that Langley had never tested this type of a cannon and had no capability of operating it in the field. The Senate Intelligence Committee then held up action until April 84, when Casey's deputy, John McMahon, wrote both committees that the CIA favored a field test of the weapon. Senate Committee Chairman Barry Goldwater withdrew his objection to the cannon, and a shipment of 9 occurred right away. Results of the CIA's field testing was never revealed. During the 84-85, there was a series of sabotage, commando, and artillery raids on the Soviets and Afghan Air Force bases, destroying over a dozen aircraft at major bases like Bagram and Shenadid. In 1985, the rebels contrived to capture 2 more modern Soviet gunship helicopters, the Mi-24, which was presented to the U.S. as an intelligence windfall. Gosh, almost. Anyway, there are more frequent reports of rebels using anti-aircraft missiles, and that the cannon test may have taken place in a 1 or 2 day period in October 1985, according to Kabul sources. The Mujahideen shot down jet fighters and 4 helicopters. A total of Soviet aircraft lost in Afghanistan estimated to be around 700 as of November 1985. The bulk of arms shipments had been less exotic weapons, bolt action rifles, bazookas, grenade launchers, blah, blah, blah. A considerable problem in getting the supplies to where they were needed before the end of the line at Peshawar. There were many stages of transit and great opportunities for theft. Imagine that. Pakistan is officially neutral in the conflict, which they were not. In February 1983, for example, the American science teacher in Pakistan, identified by the name Eugene Ray Clegg, C-L-E-G-G, drew a 10-year sentence from a military court for smuggling a consignment of rifles allegedly for the use of his students. Clegg's mysterious escape a week after his imprisonment and left the country. Isn't that interesting? So this is part of what we learned with the Nugent Hand Bank and trafficking weapons, and with the BCCI, and these conflicts are used to siphon off weapons for weapons trafficking in order to resell them. And no one ever seems to ever get held accountable. This official neutrality of Pakistan created additional problems with supply lines that just became what they referred to as the cost of doing business, meaning everybody wanted a cut because they were doing it covertly through Pakistan. Sometimes depending on which source you use, 20% was the cut. Sometimes it got as high as 85%. The very existence of such a wide range tells you unequivocally there was no accountability in this covert action. There was so much money that was approved as a result of lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C. An illustration of this was Andrew Eba, EIBA, a West Point trained officer and Green Beret who gave up his commission in 1980 to aid the Afghans. Eba claims to have trained Afghans in West Germany and Pakistan. Sounds like a Gladio operator to me. And to have made at least 5 trips to Pakistan, where he too was jailed on suspicions of trafficking. In Washington, Eva had been a fountain of energy, dramatizing Afghan needs and criticizing the aid flow, which of course you would have as your PR guy for the CIA. Almost single-handedly, Eva interested Capitol Hill in the Afghan Effective Support Resolution. This sense of Congress resolution, passed in October 1984, puts the legislature on record as opposing any program that gives the Mujahideen only enough to keep fighting, preventing them from advancing their cause. But the Reagan administration, not wishing to actually preclude the option of just a spoiling operation, i.e., drawing it out, had the State Department oppose the legislation. Eva is reported as to have been investigated by federal law enforcement for his lobbying, which violated the U.S. neutrality laws. Andrew Eva's case highlights a serious problem, which was garnering attention, which basically says, what do you do with a former secret warrior? The CIA and Special Forces veterans often have difficulty reintegrating into civilian life. In the early years, this became a problem with the Vietnam vets. They have intelligence and military operational information that can make them very dangerous. Alan Dulles cited the quote unquote disposal problem to JFK as one reason to go ahead with the Bay of Pigs invasion. Far from disposing of the Cuban contract agents, the operation led to an almost open-ended CIA involvement with the Cuban exiles all over the world. Cubans fought in Operation Mongoose in Zaire, or the Congo, and in Portugal's Angola, and some of them remained on the agency payroll up into and including Watergate. 2 Cubans were part of the assassination of the former Chilean ambassador. At least 5 were employed in various capacities, including an alleged assassination within Libya. Only a few thousand Cubans were employed by the agency, but and this guy leaves off a lot of them, actually, but because we know they were in Cambodia. He does mention Vietnam, and of course they were in El Salvador, Nicaragua, blah blah blah, Guatemala. What was true of the agents was true of the operators as well. Retired intelligence and military types have maintained many international connections and work in areas similar to what they did in the service. This is most striking when it comes to special forces. Bull Simon, Simons, in retirement after the Sante raid, became a security consultant, and in 1979 organized a daring rescue of 2 American businessmen held prisoner in Iran. The mission exacerbated tension in the period before the embassy takeover. Relations with Thailand were complicated in 1982 when a freelance mission launched from there into Laos in search of evidence of Americans missing in the area. The patrol, which may have had some official U.S. support, was organized by a legendary figure by the name of Captain James Bo Gritz, Gritz. Another legendary figure was Major Richard Meadows, veteran of many of the forays into Laos and North Vietnam. He was the man sent into Iran to check on the ground the feasibility of a hostage rescue. Meadows opened his own security consultant firm and did hostage raids with Commander Charlie Beckwith. Agency people got into the security business as well. The obvious example is Howard Hunt, James McCord. More typical of these middle ranking officers was Mike Ackerman, Ackerman, and Louis Palumbo, who worked a network out of Miami. About 20 former CIA officers were on retainer to very large companies. Former Deputy Director of Operations William Nelson left the agency after Angola and became the Vice President for Security for a corporation whose name is FLUOR, which was a multinational construction engineering conglomerate. Often the retired intelligence officers tend to get into international finance. Gosh, I wonder why that is, because there's a lot of money to launder. Such as Richard Helms, who set up his own company as a joint venture in Iran. After the downfall of the Shah, Helms moved on to other projects. Bill Colby represented a number of foreign interests through his law firm, one of which was Nugent Hand Bank. African Division Chief Lawrence Devlin, who was involved in Lumumba, returned to his old haunts in the Congo, because he's the one that did away with Lumumba, as a personal representative for an American mineral magnate. Vernon Walters, almost like these guys are actually working for them to begin with. The CIA is just a convenient cover. And then when they're done at the CIA, they just go work for them outright. Vernon Walters earned $300,000 commission in early 1981 from a Virginia company that wanted assistance with cells in Morocco. Mercenary action also was on the table. You had 1978 through 1979 was the Nicaraguan dictator Somoza, and there were several people that were hired, to include Green Berets, and they were there to train his National Guard. The men trained the troops, went on patrol, and participated in some of the assassinations. Echanis, Echanis, received a letter from the Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, asking him to avoid violations of human rights while he was killing non-combatants. In a mercenary's words, he said, "I was a disgrace to the U.S." Chuck Sanders died in September 1978 plane crash with a National Guard general and a Vietnamese mercenary. Vance may have complained, but no one thought of instituting any legal restrictions on any of this activity. Seymour Hersh, the New York Times reporters Philip Taubin and Jeff Girth, Washington Post reporter Patrick Tyler, columnist Jack Anderson, all were writing about these activities, and they are also the ones that were writing about Edwin Wilson and Frank Turple. And Edwin Wilson is the guy we went over extensively for dealing in Libya that was set up by the CIA, that they arrested him. He ended up in prison because they basically wanted his business. Using techniques learned to provide cover for CIA activities, Wilson established a number of import-export companies in the United States and Europe. He then made millions of dollars exporting sensitive American technology, and we've already went over him. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on him because we know at the end of the day, they basically set him up and stole his company, then made sure he rotted in a jail. He does talk about one former Green Beret that worked with him by the name of Eugene Tafoya, Tafoya. And it says that he actually attempted a murder on a Libyan's behalf and was caught and sent to prison. Robert Hitchman, a former Air America pilot, acted as Wilson's deputy in Tripoli because he was intricately linked to the CIA. The rest of that part is kind of a rehash of Wilson, so we're going to skip that part. There was really been a closer team of president and director of Central Intelligence than Reagan and William Casey. No director of Central Intelligence ever spent as much time with the president as Casey did. For those of you who think Ronald Reagan was clueless and didn't know what was going on and it was all VP Bush, bullshit. The director of Central Intelligence was a loyal, tough, competent advisor that kept Reagan apprised of everything. A Wall Street lawyer, Casey had grown very wealthy, making investments and giving tax advice. He was an amateur historian, president of the Import-Export Bank, chairman of the SEC. Casey had been one of the original secret warriors commissioned as a Navy officer during World War II. He was part of the OSS, been around for a long time. He actually also helped organize the Jedburgh program in London. And it says in 1944, Casey replaced his boss as OSS chief of secret intelligence in the European theater. And he was able to infiltrate several hundred agents into Germany and Austria. William Casey was active in the OSS Veterans Associations and was part of the Presidential's Intelligence Advisory Board for Ford. And Casey basically had no ability to speak in public. And as a result of that, it was considered like his big limiting factor in his functionary duty as the chief of intelligence. And let's see, several more items called into question Bill Casey working for Ronald Reagan, and they had to do with his personal financial disclosure forms. It says it was also developed that Casey had not registered as a foreign agent as required by law for work that he did representing the government of Indonesia, no doubt after the coup that the CIA did. Judgments also became an issue following Casey's confirmation in 1981 when it became known that there was a thing called Hugel affair, Hugel. This concerned the resignation of a man Casey had personally brought into the agent as an assistant following allegations that he was doing insider stock trading. The resignation occurred only 2 months after Max Hugel had received a promotion in the operations directorate by Bill Casey. It emerged that there were tape recordings of Hugel giving out business information, and Casey admitted to less than 2 years of a much more distant acquaintance. He made it seem like they were not as good friends as they were. So then Max Hugel was let go by the CIA. Had he not had Reagan's high regard, Bill Casey himself would probably have had to have left as well. He agreed to a blind trust for all of his stock investments, listed 70 former clients in financial disclosure statements, and asserted that he did not remember anything about a previously problem that they had called DebateGate. when Reagan was debating Carter about getting inside information. Inside the agency, Casey assembled a top CIA leadership to assure them everything was fine. Reagan defended Casey and took the heat for whatever was said derogatory about Casey. Casey moved to reassure all of the intelligence officers after the Max Hugel expose. John Henry Stein then was the assistant director for operations, deputy director, sorry, and was a 48-year-old officer with 2 decades of CIA experience. Stein had been a station chief at Phnom Penh during the crucial years of 70 to 72. He had also worked in Zaire and elsewhere in Africa, including Tripoli, Libya, while Wilson was there. Bill Casey's intention were reflected in his directions to his new deputy director to focus on covert paramilitary operations and political action. Espionage management could be left to the assistant. Instead, the director of intelligence intended to stress the critical role of the intelligence community in overall operations. Langley did his best to follow the director's lead, emphasizing recruiting in that particular area. John Stein saved some of the expertise in covert operations by hiring back several formerly fired CIA that had been fired by President Carter. With the capability that was being built, Casey turned around and argued in the councils of government that the covert operations should be used. And Stein repeatedly resisted escalations of certain operations, specifically including Nicaragua. John McMahon, Casey's deputy director, it was supposedly said that he was opposed to the Libya plan as well as the support of UNITA in Angola. So apparently, this author's position is that Casey was basically behind all of the Reagan shit, the Angola, the Nicaragua, all of it. And then you can't avoid the fact that he's like best buds with Reagan. So Reagan had to know. According to press reports, the main cases of cancellation of certain actions that had been planned in Africa happened in, let's see, well, one of them was in Mauritius, which is an island, and operations went forward in Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Libya. American involvement obviously happened in Angola, Cambodia. More than 50 covert operations happened during Reagan's administration, primarily around the 1984 timeframe. It says the number represents a 500% increase during the Carter administration. President Reagan fully supported this range of foreign involvement. He issued finding statements to justify each covert operation, to authorize the actions at the policy level, and to approve CIA budgets via the O&M. Reagan improved the climate within the executive branch for covert action by reestablishing the Presidential Intelligence Advisory Board that Carter had done away with. Reagan also reorganized the National Security Special Group to become a National Security Planning Group, which included George Bush as VP, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, Chief of the CIA, the National Security Advisor, and 3 other top political aides. The Attorney General and OMB Director, who had been regular members of the Carter Special Group, were relegated to occasional invitees. Under Reagan, the president himself was a member of the NSC group for the first time, eliminating the plausible deniability avenue. Finally, And people were like, he just didn't know. Bush did everything. President Reagan continued the recent practice of regulating intelligence activities using executive orders. Reagan issued Executive Order 12333, dated December 4th, 1981. While its domestic provision attracted a bulk of public attention at the time, the order reiterated the prohibition on assassination and contained a somewhat expanded definition of covert action, in which terms special activities was used. Significantly, the Reagan order explicitly provided that, except in time of war or specific presidential instructions, the CIA had full responsibility for conducting all special activities. But there's no definition of what that special activity is. Finally, Reagan had made some general decisions affecting the CIA's role in a national security decision directive. The authorization document, basically, one example of one signed in November 1981 was the covert action against Nicaragua that was NSDD-17. About a year later, William Casey, an activist stance on sanction using that same directive, basically said it was a campaign of public diplomacy, which nevertheless had certain secret aspects. There was also another one that was NSDD-75, which set the overall goal of covert actions to prevent nations from turning toward Cuba model. That's in parentheses. Cuba model. Langley had given additional role in executing preemptive and retaliatory strikes against terrorists in April 1984. Langley was not the only institution to be galvanized by Reagan's administration. The Pentagon got more money than they knew what to do with, for more ships, more aircraft, more everything, to include ground troops and special operations. The ground component of Army Special Forces, supported by the Aviation Detachment at the 101st Air Assault Division based at Fort Campbell, which is not nicknamed Night Stalkers, was basically assigned to a unit which was called Task Force 160 to wear civilian clothes on their quote-unquote black missions. They fly an assortment of helicopters to include Black Hawks and Chinooks. Task Force 160 does a lot of night flying and conducts highly classified operations on behalf of the U.S. In 1983, the unit suffered almost half, 17 of 35, of all of their aviation facilities or fatalities admitted by the Army for the year. If the Air Force had had its way, Task Force 160 would have become even more important. Special air warfare components of the Air Force operate certain helicopters used in these types of support. As part of the Armed Forces Joint Cooperation Program adopted earlier in 1984, the Air Force wanted to transfer these assets to the Army and divest itself of the function. A transfer of U.S. Air Force responsibility in the area was blocked in 85 by Defense Secretary Deputy William Howard Taft IV. Weren't we just talking about the Tafts in Skull and Bones? Yeah, we were. Despite a considerable increase in defense spending for aviation special forces, by 1985, there were fewer aircraft available than in 1980, the last year of the Carter administration. Air Force long-range helicopters in the order of battle had declined to only 7 HH-53s at Hurlburt. The service had been ordered to increase this force while the helicopters were being given added avionics in the Pave-Low program. The Army is modifying its CH-47s to refuel in the air, of which the Air Force was then giving the MC-130s that could do in-flight refueling of all of the helicopters. So During all of this, we have the invasion of Grenada, and you have military analyst Richard Gabriel, in fact, saying Operation Urgent Fury, which is what it was called, was basically a debacle from a special forces operational perspective. Perhaps the reason Urgent Fury is among one of the most secret efforts carried out by Task Force 160. And oh, by the way, that was a coup as well. The Grenada invasion followed a coup attempt in a feud between, no, it was the coup. That was generated by the Reagan administration, reminiscent of the Dominican Republic intervention ordered by LBJ in 1965. Urgent Fury had the objectives of, quote unquote, protecting American citizens that were never under threat. That was the justification used to invade a Caribbean island for no other reason other than regime change. So he goes on and talks quite a bit about that. We've covered it. So I'm going to kind of speed through that so we can get through this. Let's see. What other operation? I just want to make sure I cover all of the important ones. He spends a bunch of time talking about Nicaragua. We went over that ad nauseum. And he also talked about in this chapter Angola with United and MLNA and all of those. And again, we've talked about all of those. So I'm not going to go into, I think we could kind of rehearse those or basically talk about those in our sleep at this point. So that basically finishes that chapter. So that gets us right to the 1 hour time frame. The next and last chapter is take 5 minutes, but we will do that in our next show. And it's kind of just a summary of everything that we just talked about in the book. So it'll take just like the first 5 minutes, and then we'll be introducing a new book. So having said that, I'm going to open it up for comments, questions. If you guys want to come up, grab a mic. I see 8-track. Hey, Mark. I have not seen you in our audience. I threw you a mic if you want to come up and talk. Guru, my Australia guy, how are you? Nobody talking today. Bridget, are you there? Why is nobody talking? Let me take Bridget down and bring her back up. I'll bring you back up, Bridget. Maybe it's me that I just can't hear. Wait till Bridget gets back up here. Try to talk, Bridget. All right.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yay!
Okay.
It seems the space is under attack again today, which is not particularly unusual. And I know a lot of people have popped over onto the Rumble channel to listen.
Yeah, there's quite a few people over there. Okay. Do you have anything you want to add, Bridget?
You know, I am so glad we went through and learned all this history and in the times we're living in today, it's becoming particularly
relevant.
Yeah, especially I don't know if you caught Tucker Carlson talking about how the weapons from Ukraine are being sold to the drug cartels and how the CIA is profiting off of it.
What? Are you kidding?
No, I'm not. He said he's as close to anybody as said the word.
So can I just scream like at the top of my lungs right now? I fucking have been saying this for almost 2 years now. This is not rocket science. It is getting increasingly frustrating. Oh my gosh. This has happened every single military operation. The whole reason they have false flags to get us into military operations is to protect opium fields, number one, to siphon weapons off of the weapons being shipped to and fro, number two, and to generate refugees, i.e., human trafficking victims. This is not rocket science. We have said it repeatedly. It's demonstrated. There's mountains of evidence that talks about it. Anyway, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about too. I was listening to it earlier. He dropped it today. And it's something that he recorded, I guess, before the inauguration, because he references that he says some really crazy shit in this. But the reason I wanted to talk about it is that he is interviewing Colonel Daniel Davis. And he talks a lot about the stuff he did with Reagan. You got to listen to it. You got to listen to it. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that whole broadcast.
Okay.
I would love that.
All right. I will listen to it, but I can tell you, I'm having deja vu and not in a good way. I just finished listening to his interview with Mike Benz, and I was apoplectic at the end of it. So it is getting increasingly more difficult for me to listen to people talk around the edges of this stuff, especially someone. So I wish more people would come up here for speakers. I want someone who has listened to the Tucker Carlson interview with Mike Benz to grab a mic.
I listened to it. I was totally flipping out.
Okay, I want more than one person. I want more than one person, Carrie.
I understand. Sorry.
I want to have more than one person up here, so I need you guys to grab a mic. What was your primary takeaway? Bridget, have you listened to it yet?
I haven't listened to the Tucker Carlson one yet. No.
Okay. What was your number one takeaway, Carrie?
That Tucker Carlson was covering, and it was bizarre. It was like he became like a Gemini, because he said they're all stupid. Oh, and then he was like, but maybe I'm stupid. Oh.
So I didn't get the feeling that Tucker Carlson was covering. I will tell you that basically the first 5 minutes of the thing sent me off on a yellow brick road, because it was very clear that Tucker had discovered an angle that Mike Benz was using to refer to USAID as US aid. Tucker Carlson calls him on it and basically says it is not US aid. It is USAID. I know my dad worked there. And Mike Benz acknowledges that, and then for the next 2 hours refers to it as US aid. That was startling to me.
That's telling.
That's what I mean. He seemed to, like, he would plow him with something and then drop the ball.
No, he wasn't dropping the ball, Carrie. That's why I'm disagreeing with you. That's not dropping the ball. That's exposing Mike Benz. That is exactly what that was about. Renee, go ahead.
Hey there. Yeah, I listened to it. I guess it was Sunday, and found it very suspicious, odd. Even the way just Benz was kind of stuttering and stammering. It was, to me, it felt like, he had a gun to his head, or he didn't want to bite the hand that feeds him or something. It was very odd.
Didn't it?
I've never seen Benz be so careful in all his wording and slow. And if you look at all the comments on YouTube as well as Rumble, majority of viewers are more suspicious. They're totally pissed off with Benz's response. And it was a very bizarre interview. And actually, I mean, I may be reading too much in it when I said he seemed nervous of biting the hand that feeds him. But the following day, I went on Benz's X channel, and he's also on Instagram and some other things. So I was curious to see his own response to that interview and how it went and everything. And he started to really promote joining his channel, like his pay to watch him and shit. Pardon my language. But I found that ironic that he's really promoting hard now. Everybody join to pay and listen to him. And I don't know, I just found that rather suspicious and weird. But I felt like red flags and strange the whole interview.
So one of the other things that I noticed is he, and I quite frankly, I noticed this several months ago in some of his comments, where he, while at the same time, and this is a very common tactic, while he's telling you something that is revealing to most people, I mean, we all know this stuff by now, but as he's revealing information, he is also at the same time justifying the information in the way that it is done. And his use of that pencil scenario, where it's fine to go into these countries for these oligarchs and demand that they perform so we can get what we want from them for cheaper prices, because that's how we live so comfortably. I don't know about you guys, but I don't live comfortably. I'm not like in the upper echelon of wealth in the United States. And there's a lot of people that don't live comfortably in the United States. And I don't quite frankly care how much I have to spend to buy a pencil if it means I'm not enslaving other people and humanity in other countries. So it very much smacked to me of this thing that I refer to as the situational ethics. So I can say that I'm against it here in my country, but as long as you're doing it somewhere else, technically it's fine because we get cheap pencils. I find that repulsive myself. And that is basically what I was, the kind of vibe that I got out of all of it. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, he said along those lines, I was freaking out also. I was in the live chat, so I was watching all the other people freaking out like me. And he basically said something worse than that. He said, you can be a fascist and go and steal everyone's shit. Just don't cloak it in humanitarianism.
Basically, that is a good paraphrase of what he said. Yeah. And again, you guys remember when it became very obvious to me, based on information that I got from Alpha and my own experience with him, that there was something way more to him than was meeting the eye. And that's when I started listening a lot closer. You notice that when he's been on every big name podcast, he never talks about Operation Gladio. He knows about it. We know he knows about it. He got it from us. And the fact that he's a gatekeeper, for lack of a better word. The fact that he does not educate people outside of his paywall. Renee, thank you for mentioning that. He says a whole lot of different things because people have taken screenshots of him saying things. And when I began calling him out, I was told he talks about Operation Gladio all the time. And I said, where does he talk about it at? I've not heard him on the Joe Rogan show, on the Tucker Carlson show, any show he went to, he does not talk about. Oh, he does it on his show. And I said, do you mean behind his paywall? And they're like, well, yeah, I subscribe to him. And I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. That is not educating people. If you require people to know the entire story to go behind a paywall, then you're not part of the solution. Sorry. But anyway, Adam, did you have something?
I just got an invite from Bridget, so I figured I'd come up and say hello.
Hey.
How you doing, Colonel?
I'm great. How are you? Yep. I'm awesome.
Adam, we were just talking about Ben's interview with Tucker. Did you get to watch that?
No, I didn't see that. I heard about it. I think somebody mentioned, no, that was the Alex Jones with Tucker interview that somebody brought up. My apologies. I haven't heard about it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting interview. Marlou Renee over on Rumble says there's something way off about Ben's. I can't say that I disagree with that. Let's see. L Mission said he used a pencil story on other shows, but the Tucker show, he seemed to revise his framing of it that was not critical of this process. He was strangely careful about it. And then says, I knew about Ben's. What did you know, L Mission? Please share that with us. Jester of Night says, my favorite YouTube comment on the Ben's Rogan show was the last time he was on. This guy's Mossad. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I found it quite shocking that all of these big name people have had him on his show and not a single one of them has ever asked him why he was an FBI informant. Why did he pretend to be a Proud Boy? Why did he join the Proud Boys and go through initiation? Why did he do that? If you're going to have someone like that on your show, you need to do due diligence and do your homework so that you understand. And if he has questionable ties, you owe your audience the courtesy of asking him to address it. Otherwise, you're spending 2 hours of your audience time talking to someone who has a very jaded past, and you're not even asking him about it. And quite frankly, that's exactly what Tucker did with Felix Rodriguez. He didn't ask him about what he was doing in Vietnam as a non-citizen working in the for the CIA under the auspices of being in the army. He didn't ask him what he was doing in El Salvador, setting up terrorist training camps. Do you think an interview with a guy that's basically a CIA trained assassin, who you don't ask anything about any of those affiliations, and then you have him on there for an hour and a half talking about other shit, do you think your audience, if they knew he was a CIA trained assassin, may evaluate all of the rest of the information somewhat differently. And the same thing happens with Mike Benz. Do you think people would view him differently? And you owe your audience, just like Bridget knows this, because I will talk to anybody unless I know something about him. When we had, what's his name, Bridget? The retribution guy.
I just.
Okay, you can't forget the same stuff I forget. Ivan
Rankin.
Okay, so I wanted to have him on. He opened up invitations. He would go on anybody. So we did a deep dive into who he was, because that matters to me. If he's going out and basically seeming like he's inciting people to potentially do things that maybe they shouldn't be doing, I want to know who he is. And I was fascinated and impressed with his background. And when we spent the first 10 minutes of the conversation going over his background, he was, first of all, who are you? How do you know all this stuff about me? Because we do our homework to the at least the best extent. I don't want to bring people to you guys that I don't know something about. Quite frankly, it drives me nuts that people do that, because it changes the whole context of listening to them. I want to know who they are, and you have a duty to vet them before you give them time on your program, in my opinion. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, not everyone is as perfect as you, Colonel.
I'm not perfect, Carrie,
Seriously.
but thank you.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like, either Tucker is corrupt or he has producers or whatever. He doesn't have a Bridget, I don't think, personally.
He should.
Pugin was kind of laughing at him a little bit with some of the questions he was asking, right?
Yeah. But anyway, there were several important parts of that interview. I'm going to have to go back, as painful as it'll be, because I do want to discuss it a little further, maybe in the next couple of days, because the ability of people to justify bad things is how we got to where we're at. He knows, and we know, that Operation Gladio is done on behalf of large oligarch corporations, and that they are doing this to steal resources and enslave humanity for profit and control. So there's no way you can justify that. You can't justify that based on some perceived standard of living that we have here. If we have a standard of living that requires slave labor, then we need to change our standard of living. I'm sorry. We already went through that with the Civil War. Okay. We decided that we were not going to base our country on slave labor. So what did they do? They just offshored the slave labor so you can't see it. But they are still doing the exact same damn thing. And he got on a television program and tried to justify it as quote unquote soft power. Well, if you're getting your head shot off, or you're being tortured by the Richmond, Indiana police chief down in Uruguay, that's not fucking soft power. I'm sorry. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else here has heard, but I've heard from several sources that Tucker Carlson and his father are connected to the Pilgrim Society. I haven't done a big dig on the Pilgrim Society, but that one always seems to surface all over the place.
So we have I have not seen Tucker nor his father's name associated with it. That doesn't mean that they're not. But as you guys are aware, and I just had to laugh. I was talking, Brian Cates and his brother Dwayne was over last night to watch the football. And I was going off about the whole Alfalfa Club. It gets talked about on Badlands, like, they just found this thing. And of course, we talked about it months ago. So I had to go dig out my thread that we did on it and say, yeah, we know. And it's good that other people are doing that, but my frustration is behind the scenes. What you guys don't see is a lot of people that have podcasts are in group chats. I post most of my stuff, and all of the people in the group chats follow me. That doesn't mean they read everything that I do, but a lot of the stuff that I post in these group chats. They don't repost it most of the time. I don't even know that they read it, but most of them don't repost it, which is what they sold the group chats as being for. And that's very discouraging for people like myself who has much smaller accounts than everybody in these group chats. And then on top of that, when you do the due diligence and you do all of the homework and no one supports that effort, and then months later comes out and goes, oh, look what we found, it gets very frustrating. And I just was making that point last night to Brian about how frustrating it really is. Yeah, so just a couple of words. I just found my note page on the Pilgrim Society. You will recognize all of the names in it. Henry Kissinger, Caspar Weinberger, Margaret Thatcher, Henry Luce, the Time Life guy, Alexander Haig, Paul Volcker, George Shultz, all of those people. So it is part and parcel of the entire, depending on how you slice it, a lot of it goes back to the early 1900s, which is right around the Fabian Society time. And a lot of the crossover, because they have one in London as well, it is like the perfect matchup to the origin story of Operation Gladio. You had the Astors, the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, Carnegies, Vanderbilts. You also had all of the people from the secret societies, Skull and Bones at Yale that Warhamster and I are going over. You had all of the Oxford, the Rhodes Scholars are all in it. So yeah, it is huge. And these are the people that was working behind the scenes, supporting Hitler and our side. I found them when I was doing the research into Operation Gladio. It came up multiple times, just like the World Anti-Communist League did. And it became one of those things. It's the who's who. Paul Warburg, Felix Warburg. You guys read my Warburg. They're all in it too. It's huge. Donald Rumsfeld. I just looked over here. I didn't write all of the names down, but a shit ton of the ambassadors that are key people in the Gladio are also Pilgrim Club members. So I would like to see, or if anybody has any evidence that Tucker's dad, that would be a huge, big deal as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, Adam, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on something you said earlier with the slave labor and offshoring it essentially. Now that's one thing. I come from the Ron Paul Revolution libertarian brand of people. became a Trump supporter after he got in office in 2016. But the one things with the Libertarian Party, they're not for and according to their charter, that they're not for open for borders, right? But the way I see it is, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. Secondly, the tariffs. They don't agree with tariffs because it's taxation basically added to the price of products from free trade. But when we're on fair playing field, we have to leverage tariffs, especially I would go as far to say any country that utilizes slave labor to produce their products, we should just not accept it, because that's something we as Americans don't support, and they will fall in line, and maybe that'll affect them because we are one of the largest consumers in the world. So,
but Adam, it's not
want to get our their products sold here.
But so Adam, it's not the people. It's not the countries that's doing it. It's us doing it to the country.
I understand.
Yeah, we go over there and overthrow the person they elected, like in Allende's case, called him a communist, and then basically the enslavement of their population occurs because we refuse to, after we installed Pinochet, we refuse to allow them to do things like that we do here, like unionize in order to demand a better wage, because they were basically getting paid like $1 a day to work in a mine. And that's the reason why none of our resources, that was the whole thing with Mike Benz and the oil and all that other shit in that interview. I'm like, we don't need to coerce people to traffic oil around the world when we have our own. Why are we not using our own? Well, we're not using our own because we give everybody here the impression that we're all for labor, but we don't want to pay union labor wages for people working in an oil industry here because it cuts into their profit. So we would rather go to a third world country that has oil and enslave their market and their people to produce the oil, so these bastards get a higher return on their investment. And
Colonel, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna ask you. I've had this conspiracy theory in my head for a long time that the idea is we go suck up all the resources. This is long-term game. Suck up all the resources, and at the end, we're the ones holding the last of the resources. Not we, them, these people. We'll be the ones holding the resources at the end. So go around the world and suck up and use up all their resources, and then we have. Maybe a few hundred years or whatever from now, we have the resources, and not we, they, them. I'll yield with that.
So there's obviously a plan for them, but I think it's more evil than what you just suggested. I think that they have built life in America as a hologram, and it was done in a psychological operation narrative so that they set us up here fat, dumb, and happy, and allow unions to exist and allow the perception of freedom to exist, because we're not free at all. And allow you to think that you have a Second Amendment, but they're going to do everything. Did Second Amendment help any of the people on January 6th? No. So there's this illusion that you live in a republic. There's an illusion that you're free. And as you guys have heard me say repeatedly, it's a hologram. None of that shit exists. You are not free. You don't really actually have a Second Amendment. They'll take your guns away from you, and we've seen them do it repeatedly. And you're not free to use them against your tyrannical government, because they just come and take them in a no-knock raid and parade you around in shackles. So if you understand that you live in a hologram, any of the dissidents that calls out the hologram, bad things happen to. So everybody else is basically in the matrix. You're living in a hologram. They use that hologram to keep you enslaved. And when you hear about other things happening in other countries, you just assume because they use the same words to describe those things that that country's like our country for those people who've never traveled around. And when the CIA tells you that these rabble rousers at the copper mine in Chile were communist, you believe them. Because why wouldn't you? They're supposedly an intelligence agency. When all they actually were people who wanted to create a union. But we were told that union was communist. Well, why isn't the unions here communist then? No, no, no. They're not communists here. They're unions. You know, you wouldn't have near what you have if you didn't. The unions are great. Well, if they're great, why won't you let them unionize in Chile? Well, because they're communists there. So when you start actually thinking outside of the program that and the hologram that has been set up, not a fucking thing they say makes sense. None of it. And that's basically my journey in Operation Gladio. It kind of broke. It was like the hammer that broke the glass plate for the fire alarm, because once I realized that they were able to brainwash, you know, millions of people that have went through the military to believe all of this garbage, and if they can brainwash someone after paying for all of this education and stuff like that, only to spit out what they want, it should shock everyone to their core that you have a bunch of zombies running around in charge of everything, because they are not really seeing things for what they really are. Those who do, it's kind of almost like that. And I hate using this example. But it's like, you know, the guy with the glasses. And of course, we always make the funny about Gladio glasses, but it's like, you know, you put the glasses on and you see the reptile as opposed to the person. So those people that are actually the reptile people, and I know there's that whole other analogy and I'm not going there. But those types of people are of the oligarch class, and they know what they're doing. It's all of us that didn't know who all of them were and what they were actually up to. So anyway, it's quite an interesting time. I'm glad we're all going through this together. I'm glad that we have been part of an educational process. I don't know, without you guys, that I would have stuck with it as long as I have. Now I'm at the part where I feel an obligation that we can't stop. We have to keep going until most of the people in the United States, if not the world, understand what's going on. Patrick Jones, I saw that you come up. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, Jonas, like the Jonas Brothers. You asked for somebody who looked at the whole interview, and I watched it and was frustrated also. Noticed how phony the Benz guy was. He says, well, he's a yes but suck up guy. You've seen a lot of those in the military.
Yes.
Phony, ass kissing, suck up, liar. And he sort of said, yes, but yes, there's all kind of terrible things. And yes, this and that, but we sort of have to do that. That's just what we have to do. That's how it is. And we really don't want to do it. It really shouldn't be that way. And blah, blah, blah. And he just kept waffling. He needed somebody to choke him or curse at him. I said in my comments in the other site, he needs somebody to bluntly confront him and curse at him and call him names and let him know that he's kind of a little phony wimp.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna do it, own it, right? Or have morals and say no. Not under any circumstance do I want a pencil at any price that includes slave labor. I just don't. right? And I don't think that the United States should be coercing people to sell us shit, because the threat of us going in and setting up the whole explanation that he was using about Bangladesh and the fact that they want a military base there to be right on the border of China, which should really disturb everybody, by the way, knowing what we know of what they've done to China over the last 70 years of constantly attacking them by pretending they're not attacking them. So yeah, we need one more base for them to operate this bullshit out of. No, we don't need another military base anywhere in the world. And nor should we overthrow a government using transgender gay bullshit to justify doing that so we can create another military base.
And Tucker Carlson failed on that interview also. I saw an interview on the Danny Jones show that was of Cowley Means with Jack Cruz was present. Jack Cruz just ripped him apart into shreds, just as Tucker should have done with Mike Benz. But it was a good example of what a patriot with a good vocabulary does to a phony, dishonest, killing, vaccine-supporting sellout.
Yeah. I actually think I got the impression that Tucker was kind of shocked. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think he was kind of taken aback by the fact that he wasn't taking a victory lap. I mean, as soon as the whole conversation about USAID came out, I was like ecstatic. I don't have any qualms. I don't have yes, but, and there's no buts in my conversation about taking down the entire sleazy mess of USAID. None. The same thing with the CIA. There's not a savorable spot in it. None. It all has to go. No ifs, ands, buts about it.
I think you're right. And Tucker didn't have, he didn't know what to do when he was sitting looking face to face with the devil, apparently. So he could have done better in the name of morals.
Yes. And I know there's probably a better term, but I just keep coming back to that situational ethics thing. It's like, yeah, generally that's bad, but in this exception over here, no, there's no exception. If it's bad, it's bad. It's not bad, but it's okay if we do it over here. No, because if it's bad, we shouldn't be doing it. It's
I just wanted to
thank you.
Comments.
Yeah, thank you for coming up and doing that. I appreciate it. All right, guys. I don't know, Bridget, if we're doing there's Stellar. Nope, that's not Stellar. I don't see Stellar or Frog. I know this is a crazy time, and they probably didn't get the memo.
She was in here earlier, but she could not hear and popped out.
Okay.
But then I haven't heard back from her. So.
Okay, so I don't know.
Listener's audio was cutting in and out a little bit for me when I was down there, and then I came up here and I hear everything. Spaces.
Yeah, well, my spaces anyway. I don't have that problem in anybody else's spaces. I can be in other people's spaces as a listener. I do that often. And sometimes I have to do it anonymously because as soon as they see me, they'll try to bring me up to speaker if it's a topic that they know that I know. And if I'm in a position like, driving or whatever, I don't want to be on a space. So I'll do it. And my volume always works fine in other people's spaces. So I don't know. Tara says over on Rumble, he's a blob. Oh, Tara, thank you. Okay. So I'm going to call it a day in case I do have a couple of things I need to go do in case they are going to do the pond, because he normally likes to start around 8:15. So if we do it, fine. If we don't do it, no big deal. Right. Renee, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. One more thing.
Sure.
I think I found it. I posted in the Purple Pill some links I found on Yandex to the Pilgrim Society, and I went through one of the last links. It's very, very long, but eventually you get to alphabetical order, and I found Richard Warner Carlson. And then I searched for Tucker's father's name, and that is his father's name.
Oh, girl, you go.
Woo-hoo.
That's awesome, Renee.
They're done.
Very, very good work. And thank you so much. I'm going to bookmark that so I can go back and look at it, because that,
I will screenshot the page or, you know, the exact place I found it. But yeah, it seems to be there. He was born 1941. There's a whole bunch of his everyone. When you get a load of everybody listed and all the companies and everything to this, I'm guessing, you know, yeah, it's all connected. Fabian Society, one of the heads of the Hydra, for sure.
definitely. Yeah. As a matter of fact, oh my God, girl, you're so awesome. I'm definitely going to have to bring that up on Alpha's show. Yeah, because we talked about the Pilgrim Society way back when. So yeah, thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
Pleasure. Thank you for all you do, and Bridget and Cousin Ed and everybody. I love being here with you guys always. It's such a treat. My pleasure.
It's like a family now. And like I said, it definitely gives me the energy that I need to do what I do every day. Having you guys here every day gives me, you guys feed me that energy, and it is definitely very much appreciated. I could not do it without all of you. So thank you very much. Appreciate.
And he has scheduled your the pond tonight.
Okay.
So looks like it's on.
All right. So I might be a few minutes late. I got to go do a couple of things. Thank you guys for being here. We will be back tomorrow. Oh, hold on just one second. Now that I'm jibber jabbering.
Everybody please repost the space and smash the thumbs up on your way out, because that does help the algorithm, and it helps boost the visibility of Colonel's posts. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, so I do have an announcement. I will be at 3:00 tomorrow afternoon. And as soon as I get information, I don't know if you guys, I don't know what the format is going to be. I am going to be on the Dublin radio show, actually in Ireland. It's like an afternoon radio show. And at 6 p.m. And this is another thing. I think it's just a recording that he's going to use. I don't think it's live. But as I get more information, I will let you know. Just yesterday, have you guys heard of J.J. Carroll? Do you guys know who he is?
Sounds very, very familiar.
Okay, it
like popped in my feed, or had like a couple days ago. So it sounds good. Please go on.
He's a border agent that retired when Joe Biden came in, and he basically exposed a whole bunch of stuff. He's written a couple of books. He has a very big podcast, big according to my standards. And he got in contact with me yesterday, and we tomorrow at 6. We are going to record what I referred to as like a 15-minute teaser. I think it's part of a podcast that he does live, but I don't know that. I didn't ask all of the questions. I was too busy going through a whole bunch of other stuff with him. So I'm going to clarify.
This is Treason Guy. This is treason.com, documentary filmmaker.
Yes.
Is that the one?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and then we're going to, in the next few days after that, record he's going to interview me for like 2 hours. And I mean, he has a professional crew and everything. It'll be the first time I do anything like that. So, that's going to be very, very interesting. And then of course, Wednesday night at 9:30, we will do Alpha. We're going to do noon on Thursday with War Hamster. I'm going to go back on a program called the 302 File podcast at 7 p.m. on Thursday. He was kind of overwhelmed at how many of you tuned in. So I love the fact that he was like behind the scenes after the show that I was on like a week or two ago. He was like, holy crap, there was a whole ton of people. I could tell that they were your people. I'm like, they're not my people. They're just people that support the quest for truth and love. Because you try to find something new every time so you can keep people. At this point, it's kind of getting impossible, but we try. We do seem to find something just about every day that's new, unfortunately, in this crazy story. But anyway, okay, that's it. That's the week in review. Happy Monday. I'll see you guys in a few minutes over on the pond if you stick around. Take care. All right, guys. Thank you for being here. I hate that we have sound problems on the other one. You need an agent. Yeah, that's why I'm retired. I would love to have somebody that actually knew how to do the video and all of that other stuff, the behind the scenes thing. Obviously, we don't have any money to pay anybody because we don't make any money. So the chances of us ever getting to that point before all of this gets unfolded in front of us, anyways, non-existent. So I'm not putting a lot of effort into that. Just going around spreading the news is good for me. Oh, Annie, you know JJ, good. Okay. Yeah, he came highly recommended from somebody I definitely trust. So where is the purple pill? So Tara, on X in the bottom left-hand corner, excuse me, bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to over here. Never mind. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little oval that looks like this, and it's purple. And because I did the exact same thing, I'm like, what the hell is a purple pill? Everybody keeps saying they're putting crap in the purple pill. And I'm like, there's no pill on this screen. But if you look down there, it's the purple oval. It looks like a capsule, like an actual prescription medicine. Yeah, that's the purple pill. If you click on it, it brings you to all of the comments of the space. So everybody that has, like when SR71 and Bridget are posting the articles, they show up under my page because I host it outside of the space. So you can go to my page and see everything independent of the actual space. But while we're in the space, if you click on that, anybody that is posting links to the information like Bridget and SR71 does, they all show up there. So that's what that is. All right, guys, take care. See you later.